the channel for westerns and more. The top 10 best westerns made, ranked. This is not the first time I've tackled this subject, but it's worth revisiting from time to time. We can't deny the lasting impact westerns have had on audiences, from the advent of cinema to the present day. Have you ever wondered what the best western films of all time are? Today, let's take a look at and break down the top 10 westerns ever made, based on online rating site scores. If you enjoy this video, hit the notification bell to get my new videos. Check out my channel and Facebook page. The links are in the description. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. I appreciate it. Here we go. Dances with Wolves, 1990. Directed by and starring Kevin Costner. At the time, he was one of the biggest actors around, and westerns were largely considered dead in Hollywood. This 2-hour-plus story follows a Union Army lieutenant assigned to a frontier outpost, who forms an unlikely relationship with a Native American tribe. Despite its potential for failure, Dances with Wolves somehow managed to be an impressively directed, beautifully written western, full of breathtaking set pieces and heartfelt emotions, cementing its place in an absolute must-watch western fans and general audiences alike. The movie famously won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, was honored by the Lakota Sioux Nation, revitalized the western genre, and left such a lasting impact on cinema that its influence can still be felt today. So, if you're yet to watch Dances with Wolves, it's definitely worth your time. High Noon, a 1952 western starring Grace Kelly and Gary Cooper, who plays Marshal Will Kane. A soon-to-be retired lawman is forced to delay his plans when an outlaw with a grudge arrives in town looking for revenge. From this point forward, the movie plays out in real time as Kane desperately tries to rally support in town to help him win a showdown he's likely to lose by himself. Now, as simple as the plot might sound today, upon its release, it was downright revolutionary, shocking audiences who were expecting lots of action and breathtaking scenery. Instead, they got a tense, character-driven drama with a single action-packed climax. It basically rips up the rulebook for what westerns could be, subverting its tropes so dramatically that the film became surprisingly politically charged, and even led John Wayne to brand it the most un-American thing he'd ever seen. However, 70 years on, High Noon is now considered an American classic and the grandfather of the indigenous western, not to mention one of the most influential films of all time. But perhaps its biggest achievement of all is how watchable it is, even now, over half a century later. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a 1969 western that famously starred Paul Newman and Robert Redford. I say famously because the chemistry and interplay between them in this film feel so authentic and lived in that it's literally impossible not to root for their characters, despite the fact that they're clearly the bad guys. In fact, their characters are loosely based on two real-life outlaws, with the plot following the aftermath of a failed train robbery that forces the pair to go on the run, hell-bent on reaching Bolivia, despite the price that's been put on their heads. Now a plot like this could have easily played out as a serious, intense affair, which at times it is, but for the most part it's a joyous romp with plenty of levity and heart, which only serves to make its darker moments all the more poignant. Despite this, upon its release, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid received plenty of negative reviews. 50 years later, however, it's regarded as one of the most likeable films of all time, receiving 4 Oscars, multiple follow-ups, and a reputation as one of the best American films ever made. So really, its success speaks for itself.
They're very good!
The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, a 1962 Western directed by John Ford and starring James Stewart and John Wayne. In all honesty, at the time, it would have been difficult to think of a more exciting trio to have worked on the same Western, given the impact all 3 of them had had on the genre prior to this movie and since. But in this case, it's really John Ford who really outdoes himself, topping his classic hits of Stagecoach and The Searchers, with a far more nuanced and complex Western which sought to portray a much grittier, more realistic version of the Old West, paving the way for the revisionist trend to follow, with Sergio Leone citing The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance as one of his biggest inspirations. It also helped that Stewart and John Wayne were absolutely on top of their game for this one, playing a senator and a gunslinger on a mission to take down the outlaw from which the movie gets its name. By prioritizing its characters, story, and themes, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, again, helped to redefine the Western genre in a really meaningful way and is still widely regarded as a cinematic masterpiece.
Well, you're not going to use the story, Mr. Scott?
No, sir. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
He's right, Rance.
The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a 1948 Western starring Humphrey Bogart, Tim Holt, and Walter Huston, based on the 1935 novel of the same name. The film sees 3 impoverished men set out to strike gold in Mexico, with mixed results. Now, the plot might not seem all that compelling or complex, but in a way, that ends up being the strength of the movie, as it gives it room to instead delve into the psyche and motivations of the 3 main characters, which ultimately proves to be far more entertaining and still amazingly relevant all these years later. In fact, the film actually went on to inspire Breaking Bad and There Will Be Blood. Given that it's pretty much the definitive cinematic exploration of greed, as such, it's one of the few movies to have received a perfect 100 score on Rotten Tomatoes. So, if you've never gotten around to seeing it, then you really owe it to yourself to give it a watch, because it genuinely has stood the test of time.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't want to keep that dame waiting, whoever she is.
We wounded this mountain. It's our duty to close her wounds. The least we can do to show our gratitude for the wealth she's given us.
You talk about that mountain like it was a real woman. You've been a lot better to me than any woman I ever knew. I know exactly what you mean. You want to take it all for yourself and cut me out. I know you for what you are. A long time I've had my suspicions about you. Now I know that's your stinking game, is it, informing? I knew you was an informer. I knew it all the time.
Take a look down that mountain. This means all our funerals.
What's that?
If I'm right in what I'm thinking, may the Lord be with us. They're not soldiers, they're bandits.
For a few dollars more, a 1965 spaghetti western directed by Sergio Leone, starring Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood. To understand just how special this film is, you first have to appreciate the ridiculous success of A Fistful of Dollars, which was an unprecedented critical and commercial success that really kick-started the spaghetti western genre and the career of Clint Eastwood, so expectations were sky high for its sequel. Yet for a few dollars more, managed to achieve the impossible, building on what worked about the first movie, while also improving on it, and perhaps the biggest upgrade was the story. which was arguably far more original and satisfying, giving the genius addition of Lee Van Cleef as an older bounty hunter who acts as a perfect counterpoint to the brooding Eastwood in a story that sees them teaming up to take down a notorious Mexican outlaw for very different reasons. Combine that with some gorgeous cinematography and another unforgettable score, and the result is one of the best sequels ever made, not to mention a timeless classic in its own right. Unforgiven, a 1992 revisionist western directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. And to be honest, it could never have really been anyone else, given that Unforgiven was essentially his swan song and final word on the genre that he'd helped define. As such, Eastwood plays William Money, an old, retired outlaw and killer who reluctantly agrees to take on one last job, despite not having fired a gun in years. Now, on paper, that might seem like quite a predictable plot, but in reality, it's just a framework that Eastwood uses to systematically subvert every Western trope you can think of, while also paying homage to the wider genre and its legacy, framing it in a whole new light that went on to inspire generations of filmmakers, meaning that many of the Westerns we have today simply wouldn't have been made if not for Unforgiven, which received widespread critical acclaim upon its release, winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and quite honestly, the movie deserved it.
I don't go.
What's it come to 3 ways?
Way I was.
Are you really gonna kill them cowboys?
Assassins. Or men of low character.
We're farmers.
Bloody savages! Assassins!
Well, I guess they have it coming.
We all have it coming, Captain.
Some legends will never be forgotten. Some wrongs can never be forgiven.
Any man don't want to get killed. Better clear on out the back.
Django Unchained, a 2012 revisionist western directed by Quentin Tarantino. Now, it might seem pretty unlikely for such a modern film to be considered one of the best westerns of all time, but if any director was going to pull off such a feat, it was going to be Tarantino. Having discussed his love of westerns on multiple occasions, it was only a matter of time before he took a stab at one, and the result was like nothing that had come before. Even the plot was daring, following a liberated slave who becomes a deadly bounty hunter in an attempt to save his captured wife, exploring the brutal realities of the time without compromising on any of the levity and style that Tarantino is famous for. This is quite the balancing act, but the director never put a foot wrong, even in the way he blends modern-day themes and styles into the historical setting. So this is perhaps why it ended up being a huge critical and commercial success, redefining what westerns could be for modern audiences in a wholly accomplished film that's probably one of Tarantino's very best.
The bounty hunting business.
Kill white folks and they pay you for it? What's not to like? I like the way you die, boy. Django.
The D is silent.
Once Upon a Time in the West, a 1968 Western film directed by Sergio Leone. Now, at the time, the legendary director had little interest in helming another Western, despite the unprecedented success of his Dollars trilogy. But luckily for everyone, he had a change of heart and decided to put all his years of experience and expertise into Once Upon a Time in the West, which follows 3 very different protagonists who team up to take down a ruthless assassin working on behalf of a nefarious rail tycoon. And within this tale are all the classic Sergio Leone trademarks, his gorgeous cinematography, complex, morally grey anti-heroes, or the unforgettable score provided once again by his long-term collaborator Ennio Morricone. However, what really sets this Western above the rest is not its individual parts, but the combination of them, so masterfully put together that Once Upon a Time in the West is basically the perfect Western and a gold standard for filmmaking in general, hence its reputation as an all-time classic.
With a fistful of dollars, for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. A manhunt. A vendetta. In a new land, in a new kind of Western.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, starring Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach, in the final installment of the Dollars trilogy, directed by Sergio Leone, and quite honestly, he left the best for last, as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly brings back the man with no name for one final adventure alongside two very different foils in a race to find a buried fortune, all set against the backdrop of the Civil War. Now, despite the nature of this setting and the heavy themes and brutality that it involves, the movie is surprisingly fun and amusing throughout, but with no shortage of tension and emotion. In fact, it's a film that honestly has a little bit of everything, making it probably one of the most accessible and crowd-pleasing westerns ever made, with so many classic moments that it would be impossible to measure just how much it's shaped pop culture since its release. Not only is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a more than deserving title holder as the greatest western of all time, there's probably even an argument to be had that it's actually one of the best movies ever made in general. But what do you think? What's your pick for the best western ever made? If you enjoyed this video, hit the notification bell to get my new videos. Check out my channel and Facebook page. The links are in the description. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate it. I am Wrangler. Bye for now. See you again soon. The channel for westerns and more.